On this Tuesday night, reading, writing, arithmetic, and resignations.
It is a crisis situation.
What's causing the nationwide shortage of teachers? The Ontario Premier under pressure over the Greenbelt.
They're going to review the whole process.
The reaction and what's at stake over this contentious land swap. Convoy leaders on trial, what the prosecution hopes to prove, plus whom the defense is trying to stop from testifying. And flipping the script, how Hollywood strikes can't stop some big stars.
They're allowed to? They're allowed to.
From attending Canada's biggest film festival.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Well, there was plenty of excitement, no doubt, some butterflies and tears for little ones as students of all ages headed back to class today. It's time for them to reconnect with friends and meet new teachers. But teachers are in short supply these days across Canada, especially in Quebec. More than 8,500 positions there are unfilled. 1,800 teaching positions are full-time, 6,600 are part-time. Neetu Garcha reports on the hardest hit areas and what's behind the critical shortage of educators.
Their backpacks are filled with school supplies, but the supply of teachers in schools across Canada is low.
I think it all comes back to lack of funding. It's not as much as we need. We are in a crisis situation.
Funded, so teachers are not working to the bone, having major health issues, mental health issues that make them quit the profession.
Overworked and underappreciated, teachers across Canada, their unions and school boards are sounding the alarm about the impact on them and students.
We are pulling from our specialized teachers to fill classrooms. And so those kids that need the additional supports aren't receiving them. Even folks that have been in the system for 20 plus years, they're leaving.
Students are heading back to classes here in BC a day after the Premier acknowledged the shortage as a serious issue not limited to teachers.
Yes, there is a challenge getting teachers, but there's challenges across many areas of hiring in British Columbia to find the people we need.
BC teachers say the terms of their collective agreements aren't being met.
They were unable to fulfill their duty to ensure that our class sizes and composition are being met.
Prep times is there for us to prepare for classrooms, but when you get pulled out of your prep time as well, then it just loads onto you.
Experts point to population surges and an older education workforce as part of the problem. In Ontario's Peel region, most high schools have seen regular class cancellations in the past year due to the teacher shortage.
Last year we had 54 secondary teachers in the Peel District School Board resigned. And then we had 10 more resignations over the summer. Those numbers are unprecedented.
The situation is dire in Quebec, where certified substitutes are hard to find. Across the country, advocates agree with higher costs of living and growing demands on teachers. It all comes down to provincial government funding.
If they really valued having a world-class public education system in Ontario, they would put their money where their mouth is, because they're not doing that.
There is that fear that which of my students won't get the support they need. If I need help, who do I go to?
Neetu Garcha, Global News, Surrey, BC.
The last long weekend of summer was difficult for dozens of kids and parents in Calgary after an outbreak of E. coli at 6 Calgary daycares. Alberta Health Services says up to 50 children were brought to the hospital.
The pain these kids feel in their guts is heartbreaking. They're so little and they don't understand, and you can't do anything about it.
Daycare administrators say the source of the outbreak is under investigation, but believe it came from food made in a communal kitchen. 5 other sites that share that kitchen have also declared outbreaks and been closed. E. coli can cause diarrhea, stomach cramping, nausea, and vomiting. Symptoms typically appear 1 to 10 days after contaminated food is consumed. Ontario's Premier is responding to intense criticism of his government's plan to open up protected land to a small group of well-connected developers. The province's Auditor General has said those developers stand to make billions. Yesterday, Doug Ford's Housing Minister Steve Clark resigned after a scathing report by the province's Integrity Commissioner found Clark violated ethics rules. And today, Ford says the whole process will be reevaluated.
I've asked my new Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing to launch this review, and as part of this process, reevaluate the remaining land swap sites. These sites, these proposals, will have to survive on their own merit.
The Greenbelt is 810,000 hectares of protected land around Toronto, intended to restrict urban sprawl and preserve ecosystems. With me from the legislature in Toronto is Colin D'Mello. Hi there, Colin. How is Premier Ford's promise of a review of this being received?
Well, the Premier's political critics, Donna, are calling this a doubling down of flawed policy. The Premier is essentially saying that after reviewing 2 million acres of this Greenbelt land, that additional lands could be opened up for housing development. Some see this as open season on the Greenbelt because the Premier failed to answer key questions, including what is the criteria to open up these particular pieces of land, and how will the government prevent the same flawed process from repeating itself? Today, the official opposition saying the only way out of this for Premier Doug Ford is to put the entire plan into reverse.
This review is a sham, right? It's a colossal waste of time and money. We have 2 independent investigations, independent officers of the legislature who've already dug into this. They've provided their conclusions. There's no coming back from this for this government. The people of Ontario are angry. They want the government to return the land to the Greenbelt. They know it was a dirty deal. The Premier needs to immediately reverse course.
Colin, no one disputes Ontario needs more homes. The question is who benefits from this particular land deal. What is the bigger picture here?
These continue to be challenging times for Premier Doug Ford. This week, he's lost a trusted and well-regarded cabinet minister, the housing minister, Steve Clark. The Premier, of course, forced to shuffle his cabinet as a result. And there are growing questions about how much these homes are actually going to cost in the Greenbelt. Will the average family be able to afford them? And what about those landowners who stand to benefit because the value of those lands have risen by $8 billion, according to the Auditor General. And of course, now the Premier is pivoting, trying to shift some of the attention away from his government and onto the Bank of Canada. The strategy now, blaming the Bank of Canada for the interest rate hikes, pleading with them not to do any more of those interest rate hikes. It is a shift of blame that critics say isn't going to take some of the focus off of the Premier himself.
All right, Colin D'Mello in Toronto. Thanks. In Ottawa, criminal trials are now underway for 2 of the highest profile leaders of last year's so-called Freedom Convoy that shut down streets near Parliament Hill for weeks. Tamara, Leach and Chris Barber are charged with mischief, obstructing police and intimidation of Parliament. If convicted, they could be sentenced to time in jail. David Akin was in the courtroom today. David, what does the prosecution have to prove to make these charges stick?
Well, you know, Donna, this is going to be a closely watched trial for any number of reasons, not the least of which is we're going to have 2 sides, the Crown and the defense, arguing about free speech rights, about the rights of protest. Now, in his opening statement, the Crown prosecutor told the court that charter rights are not unqualified, that they are not absolute. He promised to show how Tamara Leach and Chris Barber were, quote, key organizers of the protest, that they exercised influence over the placement of trucks in downtown Ottawa, they caused roads to be obstructed, and those 2 pressured decision makers. The prosecutor told the court that, quote, this case is not about their political views. What's at issue is the means Leach and Barber employed, not the ends. Now, the Crown will argue this was anything but a peaceful process, that these 2 crossed the lines and they committed multiple crimes. Now, the defense lawyer for Barber had a very brief reply in her opening statement. She said, my client participated in a lawful, peaceful protest, and that the 2 of them actually assisted police during the protest. Donna.
David, how is this trial going to play out in terms of witnesses and testimony?
Well, this is just day 1 of 16 days that have been set aside for this proceeding. The Crown expects to put out 120 exhibits, including 50 videos. We saw one of those videos today, a 12-minute-long compilation from the police of video from those weeks in January and February. We're going to have 22 witnesses, police officers, city officials, 9 residents of downtown Ottawa. And here's something, the defense will want to exclude all those residents. The defense wants no residents on the witness stand. Now, both Tamara Leach and Chris Barber were in court today. They were accompanied by their spouses. They didn't have much to say in the court today, and to be honest, we're not very sure if they're even going to testify in this matter. Donna.
All right, David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. Jury selection has begun in another high-profile trial in Ontario. This one involves a man facing terror-related murder charges in the deaths of a Muslim family. Leaders of the Muslim community call that attack a senseless act of hatred.
Our community has been terrorized time and time again, and we will not stand for it anymore. We look forward to seeing how our court system will send a message that all Canadians should be protected from terrorism, no matter the ethnicity or ideology of the attacker.
Nathaniel Veltman is accused of deliberately hitting 4 members of the Afzal family with his truck while they were out for an evening walk. It happened 2 years ago. Veltman has pleaded not guilty. A 9-year-old boy was also seriously injured, though he survived. Manitobans are going to the polls next month in a provincial election.
And I'm happy to say that the writ has officially been dropped, and that means the 2023 Manitoba election campaign has officially begun.
If the Progressive Conservatives are re-elected, Heather Stephenson would be the first woman in Manitoba history to lead her party to victory. Polls suggest she's facing a strong challenge from NDP leader Wab Kinew, who would become Canada's first Indigenous provincial premier if his party wins the most seats. The election is October 3rd. The RCMP is investigating a report that former Royal Canadian Air Force pilots are training pilots in China. The police say they began probing the case when an allegation emerged last year. It involves accusations China may be paying former members to train Air Force pilots with the People's Liberation Army. The RCMP says it is aware of foreign actor interference activity in Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is on a tour of the Indo-Pacific region, focusing on strengthening economic ties and reducing Canada's reliance on China. He said today Canada is set to open an export development office in Indonesia. Taria Isri is traveling with the Prime Minister.
Indonesia is one of the world's fastest growing economies, and Canada doesn't want to be left behind.
We've seen tremendous growth in our bilateral relations over the past years.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau landed in Jakarta for the start of the ASEAN summit, a meeting of Southeast Asian nations that make up Canada's second largest export market, behind only the U.S. Trudeau's first stop was the presidential palace.
Canada basketball jersey.
He gifted the Indonesian leader Joko Widodo a basketball jersey to thank him for hosting the Canadian men's team. Ottawa is claiming its own symbolic victory by becoming a strategic member of ASEAN, 5 decades after first attending the gathering.
It's really important for Canadian companies and exporters to grow in this region, and because when they do, it means good jobs back at home.
The deeper ties come after years of criticism Canada has been an inconsistent and unreliable partner.
We haven't had a clear strategy until now for the region, and we haven't really had a sustained presence.
Trudeau is in the middle of trade negotiations with Indonesia and also ASEAN. Last year, Canada did $270 billion in business with the bloc.
That trade could potentially be disrupted by any number of threats.
Threats like an increasingly aggressive Beijing. Ottawa's outreach in Southeast Asia is a central plank in its year-old Indo-Pacific strategy.
Every country in the Indo-Pacific, their biggest trading partner is China. So the more we're doing in this region, it gives us a little more robust capacity to deal with all of our bilateral partners.
Another shared priority between Canada and Indonesia, fighting climate change. The consequences of a warming planet are disastrous here. Plans are already underway to move the capital. And Donna, Metro Jakarta has a population roughly the size of Canada.
Wow, Taria Isri in Jakarta, thanks. The American First Lady, Jill Biden, has tested positive for COVID-19. The White House says she's experiencing only mild symptoms and will remain at home in Delaware this week. President Biden, who spent part of the weekend with the First Lady, tested negative for the virus yesterday and today. He is due to travel to the G20 summit in India on Thursday. The former leader of the far-right group, the Proud Boys, Enrique Tario, has been sentenced to 22 years in prison for his involvement in the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. He was sentenced for the central role he played in organizing a gang of his pro-Trump followers to attack the Capitol and stop the peaceful transfer of presidential power. The 39-year-old was not in Washington at the time, but prosecutors showed he organized the far-right group from afar. In May, he was convicted of seditious conspiracy, conspiring to obstruct Congress, and destroying government property, among other charges. His sentence of 22 years is the most severe penalty so far in any of the January 6th cases. The Labor Day weekend has come and gone, but summer's not over yet. Coming up, how a heat wave in central Canada could be a sign of things to come. The start of September would usually mean things start to cool down in Canada, but about a third of Canadians right now are under an official heat warning. It stretches from near Manitoba's border with Ontario right through to Quebec City. As Mike Armstrong explains, a summer that was cooler than average in Ontario and Quebec might be going out like a lion.
The reviews are in, and the summer of 2023 won't be winning any awards. After 2 cooler and wetter than average months in central Canada, the heat has now shown up.
Oh, really hot. Everywhere I go, I'm sweating.
Now, it's not that there are never any days over 30 degrees Celsius in September, but it is rare. Montreal hasn't been this hot at this time of the year since 2019. In fact, it's barely been this hot all summer.
I mean, the last day in Montreal, the temperature got above 30 was July the 6th, and people had sort of given up on summer. It was over. I mean, they had moved on.
Well, the weather doesn't seem to follow the calendar as closely as it once did, and that means complications. In Western Quebec, back to school is now on hold. An entire board closed its daycares, elementary and high schools because the classrooms don't have air conditioning. Other boards with the same problem are struggling through.
Students know that if they need a break, they're allowed to sit out. We've got ice packs for students as well.
Remember. Now, if you only focused on the heat, even with this heat wave, 2023 doesn't really stand out. But that doesn't mean it hasn't been a rough ride. In April, an ice storm knocked out power for more than 1 million people. That was followed by severe spring flooding, then a storm that knocked out bridges and roads, and then the worst forest fires in history.
There's the red sun again.
But the wild weather has been wider than just Quebec. Take Nova Scotia.
They had their worst fire ever in terms of the amount of land burned. 3 weeks later, on the same land, they had their worst flood ever. I mean, come on.
Climatologists say pointing at a heat wave isn't proof of global warming, even if it is somewhat out of season. It's extreme events that highlight the problem. Calgary just hit a new all-time high for smoky days from forest fires, and it's still building on that record. Climate change isn't just about temperatures rising. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Still ahead, what's happened to Spain's soccer coach weeks after winning the Women's World Cup. Two weeks after that World Cup kiss, the Spanish Soccer Federation has fired the coach of its Women's World Cup winning team. Jorge Vilda was hired in 2015. He's not the one who forcibly kissed a player. That was his boss, Soccer Federation President Luis Rubiales. He's been suspended for 90 days. The Federation has asked him to resign after that now infamous kiss on the lips of Jenny Hermosa. He claims it was consensual. She says it was not. Players have said they will not take to the field for the national team unless changes are made on the managerial level. Spain's Soccer Federation called the firing of the coach one of the first measures in restructuring by the federation's interim president. Next, how some Hollywood stars won't let strikes steal the spotlight at the Toronto International Film Festival. They're ready to roll out the red carpet in Toronto. TIFF officially kicks off this Thursday. The International Film Festival is usually a place Canadian fans can catch a glimpse of their favorite stars. But this year, with 2 ongoing strikes in Hollywood, many A-listers aren't coming. As Mike Drolet reports, that's forced organizers to get creative to keep some big names on the marquee.
Blocked streets, big crowds and selfies galore have come to define downtown Toronto every September. It's chaotic, to say the least, but it's the price to pay for hosting the Toronto International Film Festival.
Snapping back to the reality of 2023, TIFF is having to come to terms with a festival that will likely have far less traffic.
Why? Because the writers' strike that ground Hollywood to a halt is entering its 4th month, and the actors have been on strike for nearly 2 months. Faint hope of a deal getting done 2 weeks ago quickly faded away, leaving TIFF's brain trust to plan for movie premieres without the actors who star in them.
You know, and we roll with whatever comes. The festival just takes place in the general world where stuff happens. So sometimes it's a pandemic, sometimes it's an actors' strike. We deal with whatever comes, and we are always able to put on a great festival for our audience.
And as it turns out, all is not lost. Very few films were ultimately pulled from TIFF's lineup.
How much did we make today?
$5 million. Dumb Money, for one, will still be featured without its cast attending. But TIFF found a loophole to get top stars like Michael Keaton and Viggo Mortensen to attend the festival. You see, they won't be here as actors.
They're allowed to? They're allowed to, yeah.
But they're an actor.
They're directors. They're coming here as directors.
Super exciting.
So it appears the red carpet will be a bit subdued, but that's not entirely a bad thing for up-and-coming Canadian directors.
You have the first TIFF look. No. The glow.
Guilty, guilty, guilty. I think this being one of the biggest film festivals in the world, I feel like I can finally call myself a film director.
TIFF, he says, is still TIFF, a film festival with the cachet, stars or not, that can launch careers. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is from Chilliwack, British Columbia, and it's a bit of a beast. This is a grizzly barbecue. It was made by welding together 5,000 pieces of metal. It weighs more than 1,800 kilograms or 4,000 pounds, and it took 8 months to complete. Its creators are a group of students competing in a national high school welding competition. And their hard work paid off. That barbecue won the top prize of $15,000. Nice smoke coming out of the nose. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.